Hello, everybody. Welcome. Today, where do we have some people from? I just want to use the chat. We have Rhode Island, New York, Arizona, Tennessee, North Carolina, Alberta, we see some Canadians, Vermont, Morocco. That's great. All right. We're at the top of the hour, so we'll just jump right into it. I just want to say welcome everybody to today's edWEB, the vocabulary edge for English learners, building on their strengths. So the other thing too, I just want to remind everybody is to join the free online community for this webinar. So as a member, you'll get all of the resources, you'll be able to share this recording and view it again, you'll be able to take the quiz, download the slides, and much more. So this community is edweb.net/ELL. Our sponsor for today is Scholastic Digital Solutions, which includes a suite of fantastic programs that offer personalized learning, actionable reporting, and engaging student content. And one of our keystone digital programs is Scholastic Word, which was authored by today's presenter. So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Elfrieda Freddie Hiebert. Dr. Hiebert is a vocabulary acquisition expert, renowned researcher, and author of Scholastic Word. She has had a lifelong career as a literacy educator and has scanned and studied 10,000 children's texts to discover the 2,500 morphological word families that students will encounter 90% of the time. So she is also the president and CEO of textproject.org and is a research associate at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She is a fellow of the American Research Association and was awarded a William S. Gray Citation of Merit by the International Reading Association for all of her outstanding contributions to the field of reading. She has also just released a brand new book, Teaching Words and How They Work, and you can order that now, which has just came out, and we're very excited about that. And on that note, I will hand it over to Dr. Hiebert to begin her presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joelle. I'm delighted that you've joined us today. What I want to do today is to start out with a short simulation of what it feels like to be an English learner when particular stances are taken in classrooms on learning words. So I'm going to start with, if you look at my name, Elfrieda Hiebert, it's obviously a German name. And in German, there's particular phonics patterns. And it turns out that in German, the IE is the opposite of what happens in English, and that makes the E sound. So I'm going to practice with you today. And for all of you true German speakers, I apologize. But I want to practice with you on getting good at understanding the IE in German. So we're going to learn a handful of words. Viel, Flieger, Tief, and Spiel. So let's go over those again. Spiel, Tief, Flieger, viel, Tier, Bi. Okay? Now, if I were going to do a quiz with you on these words and ask you to pronounce them, it would probably be a little tough for you. But let's see if this helps at all. So here's Wie alt sind die Kinder? When I give you that sentence in German, it's not really helping you a lot unless you know German. But it helps a lot if I tell you that in English, this is the word how. So the sentence is, how old are the children? Now, in this case, the word Tier, you can kind of figure it out because it's a concrete word and you're seeing pictures of animals. So when I add the word animal, that's helpful. Here we've got another high function word, viel. Ich habe so viel Kuchen gegessen. And when I let you know that it's the word much, that helps a lot. So I have eaten so many cookies. Now, this is again, is you're probably able to figure this out. Fliege, and it's really helpful to see the pictures and to see the word fly. Spiel, this means game. And tief, die Sonne sticht tief. Tief means deep or low. So this sentence is actually telling you that the sun is low in the sky. The word sky isn't there, but it's telling you the sun is low in the sky. So I want you to number 1 through 6, and I want to see how quickly you can identify these words. So write down what the word means in English. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. What you should have gotten, I went through them fast. That was about 3 seconds for each word. So if you need a little bit more time, I can run through them again. Spiel, Spiel, Tief, the Liga, and Tier. So here are the answers. Much, game, deep, how, fly, and animal. I've engaged in this small simulation because I want to emphasize that language is always about meaning. Yes, the form matters. So to be able to read a language, you have to be able to figure out the orthographic system. But what we need to understand is that English learners aren't devoid of the basic understandings for key concepts in our language. And what we also need to understand is that English is not like every other language. Unlike most languages, English actually has 2 linguistic sources. And these 2 linguistic sources, German and French, function differently. And that means that there are different ways of phonics, there are different ways of generating words. And we want to uncover those for kids. Again, it's a meaningful activity. So I'm going to go into 4 ideas in today's webinar, and I'm going to give you a GPS. Okay, so the first idea is that knowledge is stored in text. We read to learn both stories and information. And I want to be clear when I talk about knowledge. I'm not just talking about the knowledge that you think of in informational text. I'm thinking of knowledge related to stories as well. So here's a really rough estimate of the knowledge that is available in our 24/7 library called the Internet. So you see here that in 1986, it was just very tiny. Then in 2007, we get the cell phone, excuse me, the iPhone, and we begin expanding rapidly. And this is probably, actually, this diagram could take over much, much more than just the single slide, right? It could probably take over the whole deck to indicate how much knowledge is available. What we do as teachers is we're in the knowledge business. And that's important to remember when we're working with English learners, that they have some fundamental knowledge, but what they don't have are the labels for that knowledge in English. Now, becoming good at text is really important because people have always stored their knowledge in text. So on the left-hand side of this slide, you see a stone tablet. And then in the middle of the text, you see something that my grandfather would have written. He had a beautiful hand in German. And here's a page from my new book, which now is in digital form or in a mass printing form. But regardless of the form of the text, What we're saying is that human beings have always stored what they know in text. That's why reading is so important, because to be a participant in this golden age of knowledge, we have to be able to read well. So, as I said, knowledge always stored in text. Sometimes those texts now are in bytes, but we have stored what we know in things that are written down. Here's an example of a very old library that I got to visit this fall. It's the Austrian National Library. I went on a tour of old libraries, and I was just amazed at the reverence and value that people have given in books. Mind you, I couldn't have read very many of these books because they were all written in Latin. But the point is here that we store knowledge in text, and that knowledge actually is much more extensive in terms of the words that you hear than the conversations you typically hear between college educated adults. In fact, people have done studies to document the number of rare words in conversations and those in text. And they found out that in books that you typically read to preschoolers, there are typically more rare words in these books than an everyday conversation between college educated adults. Now, not the kind of conversation I'm having with you, where I use more erudite words, but in the typical conversation, we actually see more rare words in Goodnight Moon than a conversation between somebody having coffee together. Now, why this is important is that what we know, what we get from books, influences our thinking. And similarly, what you know about a topic influences your comprehension. In fact, there's a new study that verifies something we've known for several generations, that what you know about a topic influences how well you comprehend a text on that topic. Now, we've often taken that to mean that we have to preload or front load kids' understanding of text before they read. And that especially happens with English learners. But I'm going to suggest today that if we don't get our students good at reading text on their own, the front loading isn't going to be that supportive because kids won't have developed the strategies to front load on their own. So this is a two-way relationship. Excuse me for a minute. I'm just coming out of a severe case of asthma, and I apologize for both my scratchy voice and also intermittent coughing. Okay, so the first idea then is that it's all about knowledge. I really want to emphasize that's all we're handling. That's what we do as teachers. And it turns out that the ways in which we share knowledge is through words. Words are the labels for concepts. And this underlies knowledge. As Joelle intimated at the beginning of this webinar, there are actually a small group of English words that account for the majority of the words in text. And what I've worked on for the last 15 years is to establish, when I think of kids who are English language learners, kids who come from communities where literacy opportunities aren't great, what's the most economical vocabulary instruction I could do with students to ensure that they become highly literate? So let's just be clear that in English, we have a lot of words. So in the Oxford English Dictionary, which most of us use online, of course, but I was able to get a picture of a used version on eBay, there are about 2,800 root words, and then we've got another 325,000 derivatives and many obsolete words. So that comes to well over 600,000. Do we teach all of those words? When you think of an English language learner, I mean, that's just a massive amount of data to process. Well, let me share with you what it looks like in a typical text that we might teach at a third grade level. And excuse me again. This is a book that's been used quite widely in third grade classrooms. And what you're seeing in the word bubble are all the words in the text. There are about 1,700 unique words and, excuse me, about 600 unique words, 1,700 altogether. And 11% of them are rare in written language. So that means for every 100 words kids get, there are going to be 8 rare words. Now, some of those words like kissed and a while are words that they can figure out, but some of them are words that they can't. My point is that there are a lot of words that kids haven't encountered before. And if you're not good with the main body of words, that's going to make it very, very difficult for you. So this is what we typically do in our English language arts programs. We cherry pick. We pick a handful of words, well, really more like 2 handfuls. And in these 2 programs that have used this text, we actually see that the words are really quite different. 2 of them are shared, but the rest of them cover a gamut. In fact, if I just showed you the words ruin, feast, cardboard, fears, flights, picture, treasure, and stoops, it would be hard to know what knowledge this text was communicating. So what I did to make it more economical for English language learners and the kids who depend on public schools to become highly literate is I took a database that I've developed over a 15, 20-year period of texts that are used in schools. And I asked the question, what words appear the most? And this just gives you a quick picture. I have a digital analyzer and it tells me information. Here you see 7 characteristics. I actually get 8 more that tell you how many times the word appears in a text, its length, how frequent it is. That's the thing called the U function, and so on. All of these variables have been shown to influence kids' acquisition of vocabulary. And it turns out that the frequency and also the age at which words appear in your language influence kids a lot. And for English language learners, the concreteness of the words also matters. So what I found is that well over 90% in the primary grades, it's about 97% of the words, of all the words that you read in English, are accounted for by these 2,500 word families. And by that, I mean something like helpful, unhelpful, helpless. And then we have another 10% where there are thousands of rare words. So what I thought was, especially for English language learners, getting good at the concepts, at the ideas in this core group of vocabulary was very, very critical. I took the Common Core exemplars. You probably remember the Common Core. That was something that we started talking about in 2010. I took all of the exemplars, 200 texts, you can see here on my bookcase. I had them scanned, and what I established is that these words are critical from grades K1 through college and career ready. You see the numbers that are kind of a little bit messed up there. That tells you how many of the families actually appear at different times. So all of the families of words don't appear in grade 1. They keep appearing, with some actually only appearing at college and career ready. Okay, so this gives you some examples. What I'm talking about here today aren't the Dolch words. The Dolch words account for about 1% of this group. What I'm talking about are powerful concepts, words like mixture and discovery and civilization, words like character and responsibility and responsible. Each of the words that you see here has about 5 words in its family. So that's the average of the 2,500 words. Some families have more, some families, like the word trail, have less family members. So what I want to point out is that working with this core vocabulary isn't just teaching a word list. And for English language learners, that's like the most challenging way you could start out. How I started out with you, giving you a list of words in German to memorize. That's very, very difficult. And for abstract words, as I showed you with words like how and much, a sentence in context isn't a great deal of help. The concreteness, the meaningfulness of the words matters a lot for English language learners. So let me show you here. There are a couple things about this core vocabulary. One is that it represents key topics that we use in our social and physical worlds. Topics such as health, places and dwellings. Places and dwellings are part of social studies content, but they're also critical to stories. So if something is rustling behind the curtains in a story, that's an important part of the story that we want to understand. So these topics, there are about 15, 16 of them that underlie the core vocabulary. So the core vocabulary is something to be understood. It's not something to be memorized. Okay, the second thing is that the core vocabulary represents morphological knowledge. This is my favorite slide that I've ever developed because it tells you the story of English in one side with food. And today I really don't have time to tell you all about it, but what I'm going to summarize is this triangle. English started out as a Germanic or Anglo-Saxon language. And in German, you know my little words like tief and tier, those words get compounded or combined with other words to deal with complex ideas. And the thing about the Anglo-Saxon layer, when we have a unit like AT, like bat, cat, mat, sat, the AT doesn't have a shared meaning. It has a shared phonological orthographic pattern. For kids who come from Romance languages, Latin-based languages like Spanish, Romanian, Italian, French, their language functions very differently. And it turns out that the middle of the triangle here, okay, this middle of this triangle, is really critical in academic texts. And yes, these words are a very important part of the core vocabulary. About 1,000 of the words come from the Anglo-Saxon layer, and then we've got lots of words from this Romance layer, where word families take a very different way of being created. So you don't add words together, but you use prefixes and suffixes to create different functions and meanings of words. Finally, at the very tip of the triangle, we've got Greek and Latin words. And mostly those words function as compound words, but unlike the Anglo-Saxon compound words, which can be very idiosyncratic. For example, a cornfield is a field where corn grows, but an airfield isn't a field where air grows. Okay, so in the Greek layer, the words like graph and para or photo, they retain their unique meanings and combine in different ways, like hydrotherapy or chemotherapy. Okay, so there's an equality of the word parts there. This little diagram that I've shown you here isn't something for kids to memorize, but it's really important to think about when we're working with English language learners. Let's just think about this for a minute. Here we've got this very complex language. where we have these different systems going, which is why we have so many words. And then we add lots of words from other languages. Like we have a lot of words from indigenous cultures in North America that have been added to English, like raccoon or skunk. So we've got um, a very important stance to help kids with. We have to be cognizant that this is not a process that just happens overnight, and it doesn't happen by memorizing words. Another thing about English that I won't spend a lot of time on here today is that numerous words in the 2500, not only are there about five um, word parts, excuse me, family members for every word in the 2500, but also there are about five different meanings for words. So if you think about a word like shape, there are additional meanings for the word shape. It can also be used as a verb, like the caves were shaped by the water that came through as a result of flooding. Okay? So what I'm saying here is that there are some fundamental ideas within the core vocabulary. So to get good at them, it's not just a matter of memorizing words, it's a matter of understanding that it's all about meaning. And that meaning also has to do with how different parts of English function. Okay, so now for the GPS, excuse me again. I apologize for this, but sometimes when you've spent a week at a conference in hotels that use far too much ventilation, and then you go across the country in airplanes for 2 days, you can get asthma, is what I've learned. So I wasn't planning on having this. Um, so I hope you'll forgive me. The final point I want to make is that English learners need instruction that focuses both on world and word knowledge. This is the most important thing that I can describe to you, is that we need to recognize what kids know in their native languages and use this knowledge to build new understandings. And I want to draw on the program that Joelle was talking about. So in this scholastic program, what's happened is that those core families that I described have been used as the basis for developing units. And these units go across grades, and all 10 of them are present in a grade level. I'm going to show you the results of clustering words by grades. One of the things that I didn't say at the beginning is that to learn a new language requires a lot of repetition. And it turns out, since we've gone, in the United States at least, to a model of text where the vocabulary is, quote, authentic, that means that there are a lot of rare words that kids encounter. And for English language learners, that's incredible as a challenge in learning to read well. So here's the United States' most widely used program at this time. It's a grade 2 program, and I'm going to say this is pretty typical of both literature-based and also level text. Okay, and then I took, for grade 2, the text from a knowledge-based literacy program. So we've got the typical text and the knowledge-based text. When we compare, so I had exactly the same number of words, 11,400 from each of these programs. And what you're seeing in the typical program is that there are more different words, more unique words. There are fewer word families, and there are more words outside the 2,500 word families. All of these things, more words, fewer word families, that means fewer connections across meaning, and more words outside the 2,500, add challenge for students. let me show you how this gets represented. And I hope that you all know that I run Text Project, which is an open access um, project. And if you are using materials that have my name on it, any profit that I get from those programs actually goes into Text Project. So I'm trying to not sell you on a program. I'm trying to support you with the idea that what English language learners need is a knowledge-based program. And you can take level text programs and sort them by knowledge. Okay, but I want to show you in this analysis that I did of these two programs that in the typical program, I mean, these are core ideas, right? You're going to see them appear in text. All of these are words that appear at least 3 times because English learners need to have some repetitions of the words they see. But what you're seeing in the knowledge-based program is that in the same number of texts, you're just seeing a broader base of knowledge. In this case, which is an important idea that we get from text, and I'm emphasizing here, right, that these aren't trivial ideas. These are ideas that happen both in informational text and social studies and science, and also in stories. And what you see here is on a topic like jobs, there's just a lot more repetition of key ideas and more diverse ideas in a knowledge-based program. Again, I want to assure you that you can sort typical text into clusters of knowledge-based information. And I really strongly suggest that you do, because the diversity across levels within a grade is often not that extensive. So you can actually give kids the experiences they need within a grade by giving them topically connected text. Okay, and what I want to show you here is I was showing you the grade 2 text. And they're always fiction and nonfiction text, but these topics are enriched. The vocabulary gets more complex. So over the grades, you're actually building a body of knowledge. Remember what I said at the beginning. What I know influences how well I comprehend. So one of the biggest problems we have with a large proportion of American kids is their challenge with comprehension. What this is suggesting is you're able to build knowledge of particular topics. Here's an example of my job. So each of these topics is getting enriched, not just in the grade, as I showed you here. It's not just that you're seeing the words at the grade level repeated, you're also seeing the ideas repeated over time. And this is a really important concept. You know that we've often had a very agnostic curriculum in English language arts. The topics jump from one to another to another to another. And we also do that on our assessments. And what this is supporting kids on is developing particular bodies of knowledge and learning how to learn. I want to point out that at Text Project, remember everything there is open access. We provide you sets of pictures for each set of this core vocabulary. So for example, on movement or transportation, there are about 45 pictures with the labels in English. And no, we haven't done them yet in Spanish, but that's something I'm very willing to do if I get an expert to help me with that. But excuse me, what you're seeing here is some core words. And remember the concreteness of words. Kids know about trucks. They know about vans, maybe not really old vans like this one, but they know about vans. And that can be the basis for building their knowledge of new ideas. Now, I'm not giving you a comprehensive treatment of phonics today, but I want to point out that these known words are then the basis for teaching unknown words. But what you're seeing here is that you can also be teaching about the very prolific compounding system of English. So we build on what kids know, and concreteness is a really strong way to support kids in extending their ideas. Okay, the second idea is that kids also need to have explicit conversations about these systems of English. So, the system of English that I was describing as compounding, very few prefixes and suffixes in the base of English, like awake, asleep, helpful. There are just a handful of prefixes and suffixes that are used in the Anglo-Saxon layer of English. Kids need lessons that help them on that. And rather than this random selection of words, what I'm suggesting is that if we have these texts that are have a variety of words, that kids who are speaking various African or Asian languages, just like kids who speak Western European languages like French, Romanian, or German, um, they need to understand these systems such as compounding. So in Me and Uncle Romy, it turns out that this writer uses just a ton of of compound words, of phrases like train, schedule. Okay, so that would be one way to approach a text like this. So I'm saying with the text you have, uncover for students some of these big categories of words. The author is telling us a lot about the environment in which the story is taking place. There are avenues and stoops and platforms and so on. Rather than just, excuse me, focusing on a single word, what we want to do is focus on groups of words, connected ideas that help kids with knowledge content. And I also want to point out that when we start looking at vocabulary beyond the first 2 or 3 thousand words, we see that about 20% of the vocabulary is actually proper names. And typically we do very little with proper names. But as I showed at the beginning with my name, the pronunciation from different languages often retains the pronunciation from that language. So helping students understand proper names that are critical and are going to appear more than once, like Statue of Liberty or the word station. We also want to give them strategies to deal with first names and surnames that are going to be very prolific when they encounter things like the magazine articles on assessments. Okay, so I'm saying there needs to also be a recognition of a proper name strategy. So lessons, I'm saying, are really important, where we're showing kids things that generalize across groups of words. So you're not just learning a handful of words, you're learning about groups of words and how language itself functions, how English itself functions, that there are these different systems working in English. Finally, I think this might be the most critical thing about teaching English language learners, and that is that we have conversations with students that support their agency. Often English learners are in classrooms or contexts where there are a lot of them. And they begin thinking that they might not be able to do some of these school tasks. And what we want to tell them very explicitly is that there is this core language and that you know a lot of the words once you've started learning to read some of them. And that those words are going to be consistent. That I'm supporting you in learning the most prominent words in text. And I'm going to teach you strategies for figuring out, excuse me, figuring out the words that are rare that you can expect to see. One of the things English learners are most challenged about is something called agency, the sense that I can do this, that I have the capability to do this. One of the ways to do this is to show students typical texts. And remember my distribution of 90% of the words come from this 2,500 group? Actually, it's a little higher than that at grade 1, as you can see here. This is about 50 words. And, oh, look, the rare words, the ones in purple, are actually proper names. Once we know some of the words, we can generalize them. Similarly, at grade 3, there are going to be words that are consistent across text, and you know those. But I need to share with you as a teacher that when you approach new tasks, there are always going to be 3 to 4 to 5 words that you haven't seen in a text before that are going to be new to you. A lot of those words are going to be words that use known words like wheel and chair or drive and way. So you can use your knowledge to extend to other situations. But you've got to be prepared. I can never teach you all the words. You've got to be prepared for rare words. They're inevitable. For us as readers, they're always going to be rare words. Whenever you encounter a new topic, there's going to be something to learn. And that doesn't make you not smart. That doesn't make you a bad reader. It makes you a learner because you're learning new words. This is a very important idea for kids who are in a new language, often in a new cultural setting. Similarly, all the way through grade 5, what you're seeing is these yellow words, the core vocabulary keeps appearing over and over again. But you're always going to see some new words. And this is particularly true on the assessments where English learners are typically not doing particularly well. And one of the issues that I'm talking about here is the notion of agency. Knowing and expecting that there are going to be some things that I don't know. And one of the things you should always expect, especially in assessments, is that there are going to be some of these rare words that are proper names. I can't teach all of this to you, but I can teach you how to approach the text and to be ready for this. So in summary, excuse me, humankind's knowledge is stored in text. This is what it's all about. We're helping kids with knowledge, and we're recognizing that words are the ways in which we can communicate knowledge, and that English learners come to class with knowledge of words. Sometimes they just don't know the English words, and they don't know how the English system functions. And finally, I've talked about emphasizing world knowledge, concrete ideas, and also uncovering some things about the linguistic system of how English works. I, again, apologize. I'm typically a little bit more perky and not hacking away, but I hope that I've communicated some important ideas here. We've far too long emphasized high frequency words, which are very abstract. Words like how and much are much harder to learn than words like cat and dog for kids, whatever their native language is. They have words that they can anchor their learning to. We have to start with those words. And phonetically regular text that have very rare words with which kids aren't facile. A word like jug or a word like scat might be ideas that kids really haven't really dealt with. So what we want to do is start with making knowledge the center of our curricula. Thank you very, very much. And Joelle, I'm very happy to answer questions as I take some
Okay,
beverage.
that's great. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you so much. I know it's a lot of people in the comments were with you and sympathizing, and there's a lot of sore throats and things going on right now. So you really persevered, and we really appreciate it because that was an excellent, informative session. There are some questions that came in, and they're really good. So the first one was around, can you speak about how the word families you were referring to may help kids learn those topical pieces or that background knowledge? It seems like it would help with that.
So what I'm showing you here is that, with a few exceptions, most of these words fit into our core vocabulary. Words like ship and boat and sail. Maybe not balloon or elevator or skateboard, although the word board will be a core vocabulary word. My underlying point is that the core vocabulary represents the core ideas in texts. So any idea that you can basically come up with, maybe not everything around quantum physics, but even there, words like force and maybe not velocity, but words like speed will be part of the core vocabulary. So the core vocabulary is core. It's highly frequent because those words are used a lot for a lot of different purposes. So the thing about the topics is that topically, in an effort like this, we've pulled together, or in the, let me just see where my slides are. What I've done here is I've taken, like types of transportation. What are ways in which vehicles move? Okay, all of the words in this set of pictures are from the core vocabulary. And what we're trying to do is provide some anchoring, because typically kids know these words. They might not know the word vehicle, but they know about machines that move. Okay? So the idea really is that the core vocabulary conceptually fits into things. And when we start, English learners, I can speak as an English learner who had actually learned to read in English through, I think, a memorization approach. And I came to a brand new school. And as a 7-year-old, I was being taught phonics. And it was taught with individual words. And I just couldn't figure it out. It was really challenging for me. And what I'm saying is that we want to teach, this isn't as much about the families as it is about the knowledge that the families represent. I don't want to get caught up in, is this about teaching morphology? Morphology is part of it, mostly because, the morpheme means meaning. Okay? But it's not about teaching the families together. It's pointing out things about the families. But as you see here, this is about teaching words that connect in a topical unit. I hope that makes sense,
Yeah, I think
Joelle.
that seems
So
clear.
I'm saying
And
that
I think,
the morphological families might be the base, and keep remembering that they are based on meaning. So a family like, I'm just trying to find a good word here, like jet bridge, jetway, Air Force jet. Those words share some meaning. And these are little German words, so that means that they don't have great meaning in themselves. But if you take a word like separate, like separator or separation, there's some shared meaning there.
mm-hmm. Another good question that came up that a few people asked in different ways, but talking about absolute beginners, just people feeling stuck or not sure where to even begin. And if you had any recommendations for that.
Well, as Joelle can tell you, we had some issues here because we did start, I had done some additional work for the very beginning stages. So at Text Project, I have these pictures, sets of pictures, and I'm saying some of these are a really critical place to start. And then I have some text called beginning reads that are for beginning readers, and they focus on topical sets. Keep remembering you don't want to jump around topics a lot. So one of the texts in beginning reads has to do with transportation, how kids get to school. They get to school in vans and they get to school on buses. Okay, so what I haven't done yet, but I plan to, is actually taking some of these core vocabulary words that fit into remember the phonics we typically teach pertains to the Anglo-Saxon part of English. These are the little words. And we often stop teaching about words like separate, separation, and so on. But I have plans to develop some materials that look exactly like this slide that I'm showing right here, and followed by this one, because it's not just enough to teach about the letter sound patterns. We also want them to get ready, because English is highly prolific in the compounding. So whenever we invent something new, like the internet, we don't invent new words. We take existing words and give them new meanings, or we take existing words and put them together. So what I'm suggesting is start with some very concrete ideas. That's what we've done in the beginning reads at Text Project. And that's what these word pictures do. They start with some fundamental ideas that are important. And I want to keep emphasizing that part. Remember when I started out, I said my goal in my research program that I started 15, 20 years ago was to find an economical vocabulary program, vocabulary instruction. I want to use kids' time well. And I also want it to be engaging, right? So a story about vans and buses is a lot more is a lot more engaging than a story about Dan had a bad fan kind of thing, which is the stereotypical phonics text.
We'll probably end with this last question, but someone wanted you to clarify the place of high frequency words in curriculum.
Good question. So I'd really hold off on teaching Dolch words until I'd gotten some really interesting highly concrete words learned. If you look at how children learn to read in their native language, I actually did a study in the first year of my career about 40 years ago, where kids were invited to pick words to learn. So the person who actually developed the concept of level books in New Zealand, Sylvia Ashton Warner, had something where she had kids pick words they wanted to learn. And I had 3 to 6-year-olds choose words for a year that they wanted to learn. And then we'd write them on a card and they'd learn that word. I have to tell you, not a single kid chose a high function word. And 50% of the words were actually proper nouns. They'd be like Uncle Dan or magic markers or Crayola. Kids want to start with something that's concrete. When children learn to speak, they don't start with the word the. And yes, I know it's important in text, but what I want to do is, as much as possible, do things that link ideas I know about and words that I know about. And I'm suggesting in beginning reads, yes, there are high function words, and those words are limited and they are repeated. So this is something that I've written about. If people want some more information about this, Joelle, I can provide the group with some more information about the high frequency words. I'm not saying you ignore them, but if 45% of them in the first 100 words have idiosyncratic vowel patterns, that's not the place you want to start teaching kids about how English works. Of and the don't work right. The word
That's
the
right.
actually, yeah, the word the actually has a variant vowel. It also has a variant consonant pattern. The th in the is not the most common one. The th is usually like in that. So I'm just saying, I would rather that they learned about 25, 50 really highly compelling words, and then we're introduced to words and phrases and so on, sentences.
Well, I think that's a great place to end the Q&A session. And just before we go, I think just to talk about Scholastic Word and how a lot of what we covered today, authored by Dr. Hiebert, is included in this program. And really the mission here is to help close that vocabulary gap and help students connect words to concepts and concepts to knowledge, since we learned that memorization won't do the trick. This is really the mission behind this program. And when we look at the core principles of Word, we're really trying to develop that core vocabulary. So like Dr. Hiebert just mentioned about focusing on the words that students are going to see most, and then increasing with a thematic approach. So there's 10 themes that are all supportive of core instruction, and that's what's going to really build that word and world knowledge. And then ultimately deepen comprehension and help students do this in a fun and engaging way, like was mentioned before. So really taking all of those principles that Dr. Hiebert feels so passionately about and putting it into a deep digital resource. We talk a lot about teaching these words in context, having the fiction and nonfiction passages, as well as vocabulary skill activities, and then being able to provide reports to educators so that they can actually see the data and use that to help them inform instruction. And best of all, students can use this at home or at school independently, anytime, anywhere. So you'll be receiving, anyone who attended this webinar will be receiving a special offer to your inbox shortly. We're also going to include our brochure around how this program supports English language learners in particular, and how it builds on those strengths and the examples that go with the program to that point as well. So I just want to say thank you so much for attending, and we really appreciate everyone coming during this cold season, and and for Freddie to be here and to persevere as well. So I just want to thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day. So just on that note, we just always like to end with reminding people you can go on this community and get all of your resources here. We also encourage you to register for the next ed webinar, setting the stage for early literacy, and this is hosted by Scholastic as well in January. So again, thank you so much.